The Three Little Pigs. Once upon a time, there was a mother pig who had 3 little pigs. The 3 little pigs grew so big that their mother said to them, "You are too big to live here any longer. You must go and build houses for yourselves, but take care that the wolf does not catch you." The 3 little pigs set off. "We will take care that the wolf does not catch us," they said. Soon they met a man who was carrying some straw. "Please will you give me some straw?" asked the first little pig. "I want to build a house for myself." "Yes," said the man, and he gave the first little pig some straw. Then the first little pig built himself a house of straw. He was very pleased with his house. He said, "Now the wolf won't catch me and eat me." "I shall build a stronger house than yours," said the second little pig. "And I shall build a house stronger than yours too," said the third little pig. The second little pig and the third little pig went on along the road. Soon they met a man who was carrying some sticks. "Please will you give me some sticks?" said the second little pig. "I want to build a house for myself." "Yes," said the man, and he gave the second little pig some sticks. Then the second little pig built himself a house of sticks. It was stronger than the house of straw. The second little pig was pleased with his house. He said, "Now the wolf won't catch me and eat me." "I shall build a stronger house than yours," said the third little pig. The third little pig walked on along the road by himself. Soon he met a man who was carrying some bricks. "Please will you give me some bricks?" said the third little pig. "I want to build a house for myself." "Yes," said the man, and he gave the third little pig some bricks. Then the third little pig built himself a house of bricks. It took him a long time to build it, for it was a very strong house. The third little pig was very pleased with his house. He said, "Now the wolf won't catch me and eat me." The next day, the wolf came along the road. He came to the house of straw which the first little pig had built. When the first little pig saw the wolf coming, he ran inside his house and shut the door. The wolf knocked on the door and said, little pig, let me come in." "No, no," said the little pig. "By the hair of my chinny chin chin, I will not let you in." "Then I'll huff, and I'll puff, and I'll blow your house in," said the wolf. So he huffed and puffed, and he huffed and he puffed. The house of straw fell down, and the wolf ate up the first little pig. The next day, the wolf walked further along the road. He came to the house of sticks that the second little pig had built. When the second little pig saw the wolf coming, he ran inside his house and shut the door. The wolf knocked on the door and said, little pig, let me come in." "No, no," said the little pig. "By the hair of my chinny chin chin, I will not let you come in." "Then I'll huff, and I'll puff, and I'll blow your house in," said the wolf. So he huffed and he puffed and he huffed and he puffed. The house of sticks fell down, and the wolf ate up the second little pig. The next day, the wolf walked further along the road. He came to the house of bricks, which the third little pig had built. When the third little pig saw the wolf coming, he ran inside his house and shut the door. The wolf knocked on the door and said, little pig, let me come in." "No, no," said the little pig. "By the hair of my chinny chin chin, I will not let you come in." "Then I'll huff, and I'll puff, and I'll blow your house in," said the wolf. So he huffed, and he puffed, and he huffed, and he puffed. But the house of bricks did not fall down. The wolf was very angry, but he pretended not to be. He thought, this is a clever little pig. If I want to catch him, I must pretend to be his friend. So the wolf said, little pig, if you'll be ready at 6 o'clock in the morning, I will take you to Farmer Smith's field. We shall find some nice turnips for dinner. Very well, said the little pig. But the third little pig was a clever little pig. He knew that the wolf just wanted to eat him. So the next morning, the third little pig set off for Farmer Smith's field at 5 o'clock. He filled his basket with turnips. Then he hurried home before it was 6 o'clock. At 6 o'clock, the wolf knocked on the little pig's door. "Are you ready, little pig?" he said. "Oh, I've been to Farmer Smith's field," said the little pig. "I filled my basket with turnips and now they're cooking for my dinner." The wolf was very angry, but he pretended not to be. Then the wolf said, "If you will be ready at 5 o'clock in the morning, I will take you to Farmer Brown's apple tree. We will pick some red apples." "Very well," said the little pig. Next morning, the little pig set off at 4 o'clock. He found the apple tree. He was up the tree picking apples when the wolf came along. The little pig was very frightened, but he pretended not to be. He said, "These are fine apples, Mr. Wolf. I'll throw you one." He threw down the apple, but it rolled away down the road. The wolf ran after it. Then the little pig jumped down from the tree. He ran all the way home and shut his door quickly. The wolf was very angry, but he still pretended not to be. He went to the little pig's house and knocked on the door. "Little pig," he said, "if you'll be ready at 4 o'clock this afternoon, I will take you to the fair. We will have some fun on the swings and the roundabouts." "Very well," said the little pig. At 2 o'clock, the little pig set off for the fair. He had great fun, riding on the swings and the roundabouts. Then he bought himself a butter churn. It looked like a big barrel. As the little pig was coming home, he saw the wolf coming up the hill. Little Pig was very frightened, so he jumped inside his butter churn. The butter churn began to roll over and over down the hill. It rolled faster and faster. It knocked the wolf down. The wolf did not know what had knocked him down. He was so frightened that he ran away as quickly as he could. Little Pig jumped out of the butter churn and carried it home. The next day the wolf came and knocked on the little pig's door. He said, "Little pig, I did not go to the fair yesterday. A great big thing came rolling down the hill and knocked me over." "Ha ha," said the little pig. "That was me inside my butter churn." When the wolf heard this, he was very, very, very angry indeed. He said, "Little pig, I'm going to eat you up. I'm going to climb down your chimney to get you." The little pig was very frightened, but he said nothing. He put a big pot of water on the fire to boil. The wolf climbed onto the roof, and then he began to come down the chimney. The little pig took off the lid from the pot. Into the pot fell the wolf with a big splash. And that was the end of the wolf. The third little pig was too clever for him. Cinderella. Once upon a time, there was a little girl called Cinderella. Her mother was dead, and she lived with her father and two elder sisters. Cinderella's elder sisters were beautiful and fair of face, but because they were bad-tempered and unkind, their faces grew to look ugly. They were jealous of Cinderella because she was a lovely child, so they were often unkind to her. The ugly sisters made Cinderella do all of the work in the house. She carried coal for the fire, cooked the meals, washed the dishes, scrubbed and mended the clothes, swept the floor and dusted the furniture. She worked from morning till night without stopping. Cinderella not only did the housework, but she also helped her sisters to dress. She cleaned their shoes, brushed their hair, tied their ribbons, and fastened their buckles. The elder sisters had many fine clothes, but they were so bad-tempered that they still looked ugly. Cinderella had no fine clothes. All she had was an old grey dress and a pair of wooden shoes. In the evening, when she had worked until she was weary, Cinderella had no bed to go to. She had to sleep by the hearth in the cinders. That was why her sisters called her Cinderella, and that was why she always looked dusty and dirty. Now it happened that the king arranged a great feast for his son. The feast was to last for 3 days, and on each evening there was to be a grand ball. All the beautiful young girls in the country were invited, in order that the prince might choose himself a bride. Cinderella's sisters were invited to the feast, and they were so excited that they could talk of nothing else. Cinderella was not invited, as she was only seen in rags, working in the kitchen. Everyone thought that she was her sister's maid. On the evening of the first ball, Cinderella had to help her sisters to put on their new dresses and arrange their hair. Cinderella thought of how she would like to have a ball gown and go to the ball and see the prince. Tears began to run down her face. "What are you crying for?" asked the ugly sisters crossly. "I would like to wear a beautiful dress and go to the ball," replied Cinderella. "You go to the ball?" laughed the sisters. "What a fine you would be at the ball." And they pointed at her ragged dress and wooden shoes. When her sisters had left for the ball, poor Cinderella sat down and cried as if her heart would break. Suddenly Cinderella heard a kind voice saying, "What is the matter, my dear?" She jumped up from her stool and turned to see who it could be. There stood her fairy godmother, smiling at her. "I would like to have a beautiful dress and be able to go to the ball," said Cinderella. "I've never been to a ball and I've never had a ball gown," she went on. "And I would love to see the prince." "And so you shall, my dear," said her fairy godmother. "Dry your eyes and then do exactly as I tell you." Cinderella dried her eyes and smiled at her godmother. "First, I want you to go into the garden and bring me the biggest pumpkin that you can find," said the fairy godmother. "Very well," said Cinderella, and off she ran to the garden. She picked the biggest pumpkin she could find and took it to her fairy godmother. The fairy godmother touched the pumpkin with a magic wand. Immediately it turned into the most wonderful carriage you could imagine. The outside was made of shining gold, and the inside was lined with red velvet. "Now run and fetch me the mousetrap from the pantry," said the fairy godmother. "Very well," said Cinderella, and off she ran to the pantry. She found the mousetrap on the floor behind the pantry door, and there were 6 mice in it. Cinderella brought the mousetrap to her godmother. One touch of the magic wand and the door of the mousetrap flew open. Out ran the 6 mice, one after the other. As each mouse was touched by the magic wand, it changed into a fine grey horse. 6 fine grey horses to pull the golden carriage. "Next, run and fetch me the rat trap from the cellar," said the fairy godmother. "Very well," said Cinderella, and she ran down the steps to the cellar. She found the rat trap with 1 rat in it. She took it to her godmother. One touch of the fairy wand, and the rat trap flew open, and out ran the rat. The fairy godmother touched the rat with her wand, and it changed into a smart coachman, dressed in red livery, trimmed with a gold braid. "Lastly," said Cinderella's godmother, "I want you to run and bring me the 2 lizards that are behind the cucumber frame at the bottom of the garden. "Very well," said Cinderella as she ran into the garden. She looked behind the cucumber frame, and there she found 2 small lizards, which she brought to her godmother. Cinderella's fairy godmother touched the lizards with her fairy wand. They turned into 2 smart footmen, each dressed in red livery, trimmed with a gold braid to match the coachman's livery. There was now a golden coach lined with red velvet and drawn by 6 grey horses. There was a coachman in red livery to drive the coach, and 2 footmen dressed in red livery to open the door. Cinderella glanced down at her old grey dress and her wooden shoes. "One more touch of my magic wand, my dear," said her godmother. Then there happened the most wonderful magic of all. Cinderella found herself in a beautiful ball gown of pale pink silk. Its skirts spread wide and there were tiny frills around the neck and down the front of the bodice. Pink rosebuds were fastened to her hair curls, and on her feet were dainty pink satin slippers. Cinderella's face was shining with joy. "Oh, thank you, godmother," she cried. "Thank you." "Enjoy yourself at the ball, my dear," said her godmother. "But there is one thing you must remember. You must be home before clock strikes midnight, for on the last stroke of 12 the coach will become a pumpkin again, the horses mice, the coachman a rat, and the footmen lizards, and you yourself will be the ragged girl you were." "I will remember," said Cinderella as her godmother kissed her goodbye. The footman opened the door of the carriage. Cinderella sat down and spread out her skirts on the red velvet cushions. The coachman touched the horses with his whip, and they were off to the ball. When Cinderella arrived at the palace, she looked so beautiful that the ugly sisters did not know her. They thought she must be a princess from another country. They never thought of Cinderella, for they believed that she was sitting at home by the cinders. The prince thought he'd never seen such a beautiful princess. He came towards Cinderella, took her hand and danced with her. All evening he would dance with no other maiden, and he would never let her out of his sight. If anybody else came to invite her to dance, the prince said, "This is my partner." Cinderella had never spent such a wonderful evening in her whole life. Yet she still remembered the godmother's warning. At 11:45, she left the ballroom while the other guests were still dancing. Her carriage was waiting for her, and she was driven quickly home. She arrived at the door just as the clock was striking 12. On the last stroke of midnight, the coach became a pumpkin, the horses mice, the coachman a rat, and the footmen lizards. And she found herself once more in the old grey dress and wooden shoes. Cinderella sat down in the chimney corner to wait for her sisters. When they arrived home, they found Cinderella in her dirty clothes amongst the ashes, and a dim little oil lamp was burning on the mantelpiece. The ugly sisters could talk about nothing but the beautiful princess, and how she looked far lovelier than any lady at the ball. They described her gown and slippers. They spoke of how the prince had danced with her all evening, and how he would permit no other man to dance with her. Yet no one knew who she was. Cinderella listened to all of this, but she said nothing. On the second evening, the ugly sisters went off to the second ball, leaving Cinderella sitting by the fire. No sooner had they gone than Cinderella's godmother appeared again. Just as before, her magic wand produced the golden carriage with its coachman and footman. This time, Cinderella's ball gown was even more beautiful than on the first evening. It was made of pale blue satin with floating overskirts of pale blue net, embroidered with silver thread. Her pale blue slippers were embroidered with silver, and silver stars sparkled in her hair. Once more, Cinderella thanked her godmother, who reminded her to be home for midnight. When Cinderella arrived at the ball in the blue dress, everyone was astonished at her beauty. The king's son had waited until she came and instantly took her by the hand and danced with no one else but her. When others came and invited her to dance, he said, "This is my partner." Cinderella was so happy that she almost forgot what her godmother had told her. When at last she did remember to look at the clock, it was 5 minutes to 12. She left the prince and hurried out of the ballroom as quickly as she could. Cinderella's carriage was waiting for her, and they set off at speed. But they were only halfway home when the clock began to strike 12. On the last stroke of midnight, the carriage and horses, coachmen and footmen vanished. Cinderella found herself in her old grey dress and wooden shoes in the middle of a dark, lonely road. She had to run the rest of the way home as fast as she could. Even so, she had just seated herself on the stool by the cinders when her sisters returned from the ball. Once more, all of the ugly sisters could talk about was the beautiful stranger with whom the prince had danced. On the evening of the third ball, Cinderella's fairy godmother appeared as soon as the ugly sisters had left. When her godmother had touched her with a magic wand, Cinderella found herself in a gown that was more splendid and magnificent than any she had had yet. It was made of silver and gold lace. It shimmered as she moved. On her feet were golden slippers. Diamonds sparkled at her throat, and her golden hair was held high by a dazzling diamond tiara. Cinderella was so delighted that she hardly knew how to thank her godmother. "Enjoy yourself, my dear," said the godmother, "but do not forget the time." When Cinderella arrived at the ball in a dress of silver and gold, she looked more magnificent that no one knew how to speak for astonishment. The prince danced with no one other but Cinderella all evening, and if anyone invited her to dance, he said, "This is my partner." Cinderella was so happy she forgot all about the time. Suddenly the clock began to strike 12. Cinderella was terrified that she would find herself in the ballroom in her old grey dress. She rushed out of the door with such haste that she lost her slipper. The prince ran after her and saw the slipper. He picked it up, and it was small and dainty and all golden. By the time Cinderella reached the place where her carriage had been, it had disappeared and she was in her old clothes. This time she had to run all the way home. The prince looked everywhere for her but could not find her. He did not know her name, but he had fallen in love with her and he was determined to marry her. So the next morning the prince took the golden slipper to his father the king, and he said, "No one shall be my wife but whose foot this golden slipper fits." The king's herald was sent through the streets of the city carrying the small golden slipper on a blue cushion. The prince himself followed the herald, hoping to find the lady with whom he had danced. Every lady who had been to the feast was eager to try on the slipper. Each one hoped that the slipper would fit her and that she would marry the prince. Many ladies tried to squeeze their foot into the slipper, but all their feet were too large for such a dainty shoe. At last the herald, followed by the prince, came to Cinderella's house. Each of the ugly sisters were determined to squeeze her foot into the tiny slipper so that she could marry the prince. But they both had large, ugly feet. Even though they struggled until their feet were bleeding, neither one could force their foot into the slipper. At last the prince turned to Cinderella's father and asked, "Have you no other daughter?" "I have one more," replied the father, "but she's always in the kitchen." Then the ugly sisters cried out, "She is much too dirty. She cannot show herself." But the prince insisted, and so Cinderella was sent for. Cinderella first washed her hands and face clean, then went down and bowed before the prince, who gave her the golden shoe. She seated herself on the stool, drew her foot out of the heavy wooden shoe, and put it onto the slipper, which fitted like a glove. When Cinderella stood up and the prince looked at her face, he knew it was the beautiful maiden who had danced with him. He cried out, "This is the true bride." At that moment, Cinderella's fairy godmother appeared and turned her once more into the beautiful princess. The old grey dress became a velvet gown. The prince lifted Cinderella onto his horse and rode away with her. The two ugly sisters were horrified to discover that Cinderella was the beautiful princess who had been to the 3 balls. They were so angry that they were pale with rage. At the palace, the king was glad to have welcomed his son's bride. He arranged a magnificent wedding for the prince and Cinderella. All the kings and queens, the princes and princesses in the land, came to the wedding. The wedding feast lasted a whole week, and so Cinderella and the prince lived happily ever after. The Princess and the Pea. Once upon a time, there was a prince. When he grew up, he wanted to marry a princess, but he wanted her to be a real princess. The prince went all over the world looking for a real princess whom he could marry. The prince met many princesses, but there was always something the matter with them. One was too tall, another was too small. One was too sad, and another was too gay. Somehow or another, not one of the princesses was just right. The prince was never quite sure if they were real princesses. At last the prince came home again. He was very sad because he did want to marry a real princess. Then one night there was a terrible storm. The lightning flashed, the thunder roared, and the wind blew and the rain poured down. In the middle of the storm, there was a knock on the door of the castle. The old king went to open the door. There, standing in the pouring rain, was a lovely lady. She might have been a princess, but she was so wet that it was difficult to tell. Her hair was so wet that the water was running down her face. Her clothes were so wet that the water was pouring out of them. Her shoes were so wet that the water was running in at the toes and out at the heels. The king led the princess into the castle out of the wind and the rain. There she stood in a pool of water, and all she could say was, "I am a real princess." The prince could not believe his ears when he heard her say, "I am a real princess." The old queen heard her say, "I am a real princess." "We'll see about that," thought the old queen, but she did not say anything. While the princess was being bathed and dried and dressed in dry clothes, the queen went to see about a bedroom for her. The queen had all the bedclothes taken off the bed. Then she put a pea under the mattress. Then more mattresses were put on top until there were 20 mattresses on top of the pea. Then the queen had 20 feather beds piled on top of the 20 mattresses. Now we shall find out if you are a real princess, said the queen to herself. When the princess was warmed and fed, the queen led her to the bedroom and tucked her into bed. In the morning, the old queen went to see the princess. "How did you sleep, my dear?" she asked her. "Dreadfully," replied the princess. "I hardly slept a wink all night." "What was the matter?" asked the old queen. "I do not know what was in the bed," replied the princess, "but there was something hard in it, and now I am black and blue all over." Then the queen knew that this was a real princess because she had felt the pea through 20 mattresses and 20 feather beds. Only a real princess would be as tender as that. The prince was filled with joy when the old queen told him that they had indeed found a real princess. Now the queen had the pea taken out of the bed so that the poor princess could sleep well. A wedding was arranged between the prince and the real princess. And then there was great joy in the castle. As for the pea, it was placed in a museum. It may still be seen there if no one has taken it away. The Sly Fox and the Little Red Hen. Once upon a time, there was a little red hen. She lived all by herself in a little house in the woods. Near the little red hen, there lived a sly young fox. He did not live by himself. He lived with his mother in a den. The sly young fox Fox wanted to eat the Little Red Hen for his dinner. He made all sorts of plans to catch her. He tried many, many times to catch her. But she was a wise little hen. Not one of the Sly Fox's plans worked. He grew quite thin, trying to catch the Little Red Hen. One day the sly young fox said to his mother, "Today I will catch the Little Red Hen. I have made the best plan of all." He picked up a bag and slung it over his back. "I shall put the Little Red Hen in this bag," he said to his mother as he went out. "Put a pot of water on the fire to boil," he went on. "We shall have the Little Red Hen for our dinner." Then the sly young fox crept up to the Little Red Hen's house. He hid himself by the side of the house and waited. Soon the Little Red Hen came out of her little house. She did not see the sly young fox. She began to pick up sticks for her fire. The Little Red Hen had left the door of the house open. When her back was turned, the sly young fox crept inside the house. The sly fox hid behind the door. The Little Red Hen carried her wood into the house. She shut the door. Then she saw the sly young fox. Poor Little Red Hen was very frightened. She dropped her wood. Then, before the fox could move, she flew up to the high beam. Up on the high beam, the Little Red Hen felt safe. She knew that the sly young fox could not get up there. "Ha ha, you can't catch me, Mr. Fox," she said. "You had better go home." "Oh, so I can't catch you?" said the sly young fox. "We'll soon see about that." Then the sly young fox began to chase his tail. The Little Red Hen looked down from her beam and watched him. Round and round went the sly young fox, round and round without stopping. Soon the Little Red Hen's head began to go round and round and round. She became so dizzy that she fell down from the high beam. "Aha," said the sly young fox as Little Red Hen dropped into his bag. "Who said that I could not catch you?" The sly young fox slung the bag over his back and set off for his den. On the way, the fox sat down for a rest. It was a hot day, and soon he fell asleep. When the fox was asleep, the little red hen popped her head out of the bag. Then she crept quietly out. The little red hen then picked up some stones. She put the stones into the bag. And then she ran home. When the sly young fox awoke, he did not know what had happened. He picked up his bag and set off for his den. Dear me, he thought to himself, this bag is becoming heavier. As the sly young fox came to his den, he shouted to his mother, "I've got the little red hen at last. Is the water boiling?" "Yes, my son," said his mother. Then the sly young fox opened the bag over the pot of boiling water. The big stones fell into the water with a very big splash. The boiling water splashed all over the sly young fox and his mother. They were both killed at once. Then the little red hen lived happily ever after in a little house in the woods.